story begins in 1977 when a young man graduated with a degree in fine art from the University of Nairobi. As you heard in the morning's discussion presentation by Chacha Nyagoti Chacha, those would have been the pioneering graduates of our universities. He graduated with a degree in fine art and was very talented. He had been involved in the carving of the sculpture that would become Kenya's gift to the UN. It's that soapstone carving that you see on your screen. It sits at the UNESCO Annex building in Paris. He spent the next 2 years trying to find financing so that he could go to Oxford or Cambridge for a master's degree. He did not succeed. There was no scholarship he could qualify for because his subject was slightly esoteric, and there was no loan program to which he could apply. 30 years later, this man's daughters would get into graduate school, receive offers for graduate school at Harvard, Fletcher, the London School of Economics, and Oxford. They too would struggle to find financing for their education. The daughters' friends would be in a similar situation. Some would defer for a year or two while they cobbled together some unorthodox, highly inefficient, frequently expensive types of financing in order to attend. Some would forego the university of their dreams in order to go to the kinds of universities they could afford. And others would give up the idea of graduate school altogether. All of them had in common the fact that they were highly talented. They had received offers from the world's leading universities. And after they had exhausted the last scholarship dollar, they still could not afford the education that they had received an offer for. The young man in the story is my father. And the challenge that he faced 40 years ago repeats itself every year as every new cohort of African scholars who are seeking to advance their education abroad seeks financing. The challenge is that there aren't enough scholarships out there to meet demand. We heard from our colleague from the MasterCard Foundation earlier today that the demand for scholarships is endless. The supply is finite. There aren't enough scholarships to meet demand. The primary source of financing for many students who go to the US is college scholarships. They are some of the most generous in the world. But even that constitutes the primary source of funding for only 19% of scholars, international scholars, studying in the US. Private scholarships, like the MasterCard scholarship, like the IFP that ended in 2013, are very scarce. They're a drop in the ocean. Loans, which would be another alternative, are very difficult to come by as an African student because you need collateral, you need credit history, or you need a cosigner, and all these things are very difficult to come by unless you already have family in the US. As a result of this, the vast majority of international students in the US, and by extension, African students in the US, fund themselves privately. What this means is that international students skew largely towards the wealthy, the ones who can meet the difference from their personal or family resources, the difference between what scholarships they're offered and what an education costs. That graph is really important, and allow me to dwell on it just a little bit. When we aggregate from the individual stories that I spoke about earlier to the big picture, what you have is an African continent whose enrollment is lagging behind in global universities. And I focus on the US because the data is very readily available. But some of these trends are true across leading universities in the world. There are as many smart Saudi students as there are Kenyan students, even if, as you can see, they are the opposites in terms of direction of travel of enrollment in the graph before you. And as many Indian students who are smart as they are African. And I realize I'm mixing continents and countries here, but that's for effect. Because the enrollment numbers do not make sense when you start from that point that there are as many smart Africans as there are from other regions. And yet our enrollment is lagging behind because we rely largely on the generosity of others, on the philanthropy of universities or of Ford Foundation and MasterCard to get our best and brightest educated. In a context where admissions officers are often forced to choose between diversity and revenue, revenue always wins. As a result of that, enrollment in the US is linked very directly to availability of funding. I'll spend one more moment on that, and I'll go back to the Saudi and US, the Saudi students in the US and Kenyan students in the US numbers. In 2005, there were 3,400 Saudi students in the US and 6,500 Kenyan students in the US. That year, the Saudi government instituted a scholarship program. Fast forward a decade later, there were 53,000 Saudi students in the US. Meanwhile, Kenya had gone through a post-electoral crisis. The dollar against the shilling, the exchange rate wasn't favorable, and Kenyan numbers dropped to 3,200 by 2015. And the numbers for 2016 are about 3,000. So the direction of travel is downwards. The Nigerian numbers are also interesting in this way because they're linked to availability of and the price of oil. And we have seen them start to decline because of the price of oil in world markets. But nonetheless, the Nigerian students constitute about a quarter of all African students in the US because they come with resources. Short of that, the numbers of African students in the US would continue to be drastically lower. The final number I will leave you with, which isn't on the screen, is that there were more African students in the US in 1985, 30 years ago, than there were in 2015. That direction of travel should be a cause for concern.
And the question did arise, where do I go to next and how do I pay for it? Now, fortunately, unlike Lydiah, I did qualify for 5 scholarships. And I remember 2 of them came when I was already at Carnegie Mellon. And while I was there, my scholarship there by UN Women hadn't also come through. And then I got 1 from Europe. And I remember asking myself, where do I go to now? I've gotten this opportunity to go to study in Europe in 3 different countries. It's fully paid for, everything is done. I'm at Carnegie Mellon, my scholarship is still 50-50, what's my way forward? And I remember I sat down and asked myself, what do I want to do? And something came out very clear in my mind, is that I wanted to be part of the solution in this country. And what was going to provide me with education that would solve the questions I have back at home. And because I was in Carnegie Mellon in Rwanda, the answer was almost obvious. Of course, not completely. I sat down with Crystal and I told her, okay, I've gotten to go to Europe, what do I do? And she told me, just be patient, we'll get this. But my decision was solely based on, I wanted to be part of the young people who could almost automatically provide solutions to this country. I love your presentation. It's beautiful, it's awesome, but I'll pose to you the same question. How do you then allow your students, how do you enable people like me who, instead of opting to go to Europe or going to South Korea or Japan, people who want to study in this region? Because I truly believe that the challenges or the problems that we are facing currently can only be solved when when your professor is sharing his experience, like Dr. Clay said, adding spice, but you are looking at the problem real life as it's happening now. How do you bridge that? Having those people go to the US. So I did go to the US, to Pittsburgh, and I remember I was having the same challenge, that your professors sit there and they're really talking about their market. Yeah, but what about my problem? I was there thinking about how do I bring solutions to the issues that I was having.
Thank you so much. I think that's an important part of the chorus of solutions that we need. There is, as credible a need for ensuring there is financing for tertiary education here as there is for ensuring that we have secondary education and we have primary education, and that all these things matter. So on the outset, I'd say absolutely we do need to do more to ensure that those who want to study on the continent do so. There are some organizations that are already working in this space, and studying on the African continent is generally more affordable, and therefore being able to get financing is not as big a hurdle as it is if you're going to a US university. And as I said, US is one place of the many places where leading universities are located, where we're interested in taking students to. But allow me to use your question to address a broader question, which is, why does it matter for students to be globally connected? I strongly believe that in a 21st century where people have advanced, I like the example that was given of Korea earlier by Dr. Clay, where people have advanced by taking ideas from one context and translating them to another. I strongly believe that that mobility is absolutely valuable for that. And we do ourselves a disservice by not having that exposure to that range of opportunity. An extra anecdote on the point that Dr. Clay made about South Korea. I listened to Jim Yong Kim, the World Bank president, who is Korean, talk a couple of weeks ago ahead of the World Bank spring meetings about his experience growing up in Korea. He said he was born in South Korea in 1959, a year when South Korea did not qualify for World Bank loans. They were so poor, they could not qualify for that. The concerted effort in ensuring that a global education is part of the story is part of the reason why that unfolding happens the way it does. So really, A, there are actors stepping into this space. B, the global outside Africa matters. And I think if there is a place with a gap, it's that has the biggest gap. But I would encourage a lot more to step into the Africa space. And hopefully, once we demonstrate this very hard thing we're looking to demonstrate, which is an African student getting a loan to go to Colombia is a good investable proposition, good investment. Look at how they're able to pay back. Then others can step in a lot quicker and get capital a lot quicker to fund a student like you to go to a university in Rwanda.